Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Obi-Wan Kenobi. Let's talk about it. So Obi-Wan Kenobi is a Star Wars limited series on Disney Plus, and each of the episodes are directed by Deborah Chow, who has previously worked in the Star Wars franchise as a director on the Mandalorian series, one of my favorite shows of all time. Okay, so I believed that Obi-Wan Kenobi would be in safe hands, considering the fact that it had one of the directors from the Mandalorian directing each and every episode. But people have definitely had mixed reactions when it comes to the Obi-Wan series, despite it being hyped up so much initially. And I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on the show as well as the hype surrounding it in this video. But before we get into all of that good stuff, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now, without further ado, let's get into my review of Obi-Wan Kenobi. So many of you guys will know that I am not a Star Wars girly, to say the least, okay? I am not the biggest Star Wars fan, so, you know, take everything that I say here with a grain of salt. And another thing that you guys should know is that whilst I completely understand that there were a bunch of Star Wars fans that were really excited for this series, mostly because of the return of Ewan McGregor's iteration of Obi-Wan Kenobi, I personally wasn't a part of that group. And it's for two main reasons. First of all, because I'm not a fan of the prequels. I will say this with my whole chest. I know that it used to be popular. It used to be safe to say that you weren't a fan of the prequels back in the day, back when people still had reason and common sense. Anyway, okay, but lately, ever since a certain sequel trilogy happened, there seems to be a revision of history. There seems to be a rewriting of history occurring right before my eyes, where people are pretending that the prequel trilogy was good. I will not have this. I am not having any of this. Guys, stop lying right now. Stop lying right now. I understand to some extent that some people watched the prequel trilogy when they were younger. They grew up with these films and they see them through rose-tinted glasses, so they genuinely love the prequel trilogy, you know, regardless of what everyone else says. I understand that to some extent, although, like, do you lack taste? But anyway, I understand, but the idea that this newfound love and appreciation for the prequel trilogy would be born out of the hatred that some people have for the sequel trilogy is what I find disturbing and truly kind of pointless, because two things can be true at the same time. The sequel trilogy can be riddled with errors, okay, can be problematic and not perfect, whilst at the same time the prequel trilogy can also be trash, can also be full of errors, can also be imperfect. Those two things, those two facts can coexist in this world. So the idea that people would swap their appreciation for the sequel trilogy and transfer it over to the prequel trilogy because of how the sequel trilogy ultimately ended, I think is absurd. Perhaps they need a place to put the rest of their Star Wars love, and because the sequel trilogy let them down so much, they can't put it in the sequel trilogy anymore, so they have to, I guess, resort to putting their love and affection towards the prequels. But that's absurd. Like, those films don't deserve it. Those films don't deserve it, guys. I promise you deserve better. I promise you deserve better than the prequel trilogy. Have you not seen Rogue One? But anywho, the second reason why I wasn't particularly excited to see the return of Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan Kenobi is because I personally feel that Star Wars is at its weakest when it's trying to recapture the magic of iconic characters or iconic story beats. I personally feel that Star Wars, especially new Star Wars under Disney, is at its strongest when it's trying to do something entirely different, introducing a whole different, you know, section of this world and expanding upon the lore without, you know, relying too much on Easter eggs and references to what came before. And I think a perfect example of this is the Mandalorian. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. None of these other girlies are doing it like the Mandalorian is. And I think a big part of that is not only the genius of Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, let's be real, but also because the Mandalorian has the space to create and do wild things. And not every single episode of The Mandalorian is equally exceptional, but the ones that are truly just mwah, some of the best Star Wars that has ever Star Wars. So yeah, I wasn't the most excited for the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, but I have to admit that the stakes were quite high for me, and it was no skin off my nose to check the series out. And so, having seen all of the 6 episodes of the show, I'm pretty happy to say that overall, I think it was a good time. But I did see that some people felt differently. So like I said, one of the main issues facing a series like Obi-Wan Kenobi is that it comes with all of this baggage, all of this previous lore surrounding character arcs and story beats, and you have to take all of that into account when you're trying to create a brand new story for this existing character. Another issue stems from the fact that this is a prequel series, because even though this is technically telling a brand new story within the Star Wars mythos, this is still taking place in the past, and so you still have to kind of adhere to the storylines that come afterwards. So it's kind of stuck in the middle of, having a bunch of history and character arcs that were explored in the prequel trilogy and having to kind of follow up on those, but also, keeping in mind the ultimate outcome of these characters like Darth Vader and Obi-Wan. Like, we know what happens to them because we saw them in the original trilogy. So you can't really mess around with that too much, and that kind of creates this like confinement in the story and a very limited space for this story to operate. Not only can the story be limited for the writers of the show, but even from an audience perspective, it can be tough because the outcome of these characters, what happens to them in the future. So how can you as an audience member be invested in this story? For example, when you see action sequences between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi, as cool and sick as they are, how can you as an audience member feel any kind of suspense or dread when you know that ultimately they're both going to walk out of it alive? And it's the same thing with Princess Leia. The Leia that we meet in this limited series is actually 10 years old, because all of these events are taking place 10 years after, is it episode 3? The Phantom Menace? Oh god. Is it The Phantom Menace? That's episode 3. But yeah, it's taking place 10 years after the Phantom Menace. But Leia is 10 years old and she ends up getting kidnapped by Reva, and it's supposed to be this high stakes situation, but in the end the stakes don't really feel real because you already know ultimately that Leia is going to survive this, because guess what? We saw her in the future. Thankfully, when it comes to this show, I would say it realizes that it won't be able to set up these stakes in a substantial way pretty early on. I think by episode 3 it shifts focus to really highlight the personal relationships between these iconic characters, especially of course the relationship between Obi-Wan Kenobi and his previous Padawan. It is called Padawan, right? He is Padawan. His previous Padawan, Anakin Skywalker. I am so proud of myself for remembering that name. Ugh, patting myself on the back. But that is where the series shines the most, is when it focuses on the tension between these two characters who haven't seen each other in 10 years at the beginning of the show, and they reunite in the series, and the reunion is just bombastic. It is so emotional, and I think the show does a great job of really selling us on the pain and the regrets that Obi-Wan feels when he sees what his Padawan has become, especially in the finale. I would say that my enjoyment of it definitely wavered as the weeks went on. Now, I appreciated the fact that in the first week when the series dropped on, was it Star Wars Celebration Day, and we did get 2 episodes. I think it was necessary, quite frankly. I think if that first episode had been the only episode that we saw that week, people would have lost their damn minds, more than they already did. More than they already did, okay? But there's such thing as a slow burn, and then there's such thing as just like boredom boredom. And quite frankly, those first 2 episodes could have been one nice, neat, tight episode that was, you know, more emotionally impactful, chock full of stuff, instead of the 2 premiere episodes that we got here, where it felt like it spent a lot of time marveling over the fact that Ewan McGregor was back as Obi-Wan Kenobi. And, you know, like I said, I'm not particularly a fan of the prequels, so that didn't really have the same emotional impact for me. And I also think even fans of the prequels wanted to see stuff happen in the show, so the fact that we wasted 2 out of the 6 episodes that we got was kind of abysmal. So yeah, I would have combined episodes 1 and 2, and if we were going to get an extra episode out of that, I would have focused more on the other side, on the Empire side. I would have focused more on Darth Vader, and I would have focused more on my sister Reva, but we'll talk about them in a moment. And secondly, when it comes to the plot overall, I do think it was a mistake to have Leia's kidnapping be the main plot point. It kind of felt a little bit like The Mandalorian, like they were trying to do a Mandalorian. I don't think I didn't notice that we're trying to replicate the Baby Yoda Mandalorian relationship with Obi-Wan and Leia. But it didn't work out that way because, you know, they're very different characters, and also the Mandalorian did it first, so it had that like impact of being first, whereas, you know, with Obi-Wan it just felt like a pale version of what we saw in the Mandalorian. And the father-son relationship between the Mandalorian and Grogu is like second to none, and that wasn't really replicated with Obi-Wan and Leia because it's a completely different context here. So I don't know why they went that route, honestly. I didn't hate the characterization of young Leia. Some people have been hating on her online. Honestly, do you not have a hobby? Go touch grass. For you to be bullying a 10-year-old, did you not learn anything about the child actor who portrayed young Anakin literally 20 years ago? Did you literally learn nothing? Whatever. People are so annoying. We'll go through some annoying things that happen throughout the series. I will say though, I did like the fact that they subverted expectations and focused on Leia instead of Luke, kind of highlighting that character. But at the end of the day, if I were Deborah Chow, I personally would not have chosen this pitch as the one for the Obi-Wan series, which is probably why I would say that the best episodes that we got from the Obi-Wan series were definitely the last 2 episodes. It really honed in on the relationship between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. I have to say that episodes 5 and 6 of Obi-Wan Kenobi were superb. I loved the last 2 episodes of this series, and for me, it really saved the show overall. The show was skirting on a 6.5 before the last 2 episodes hit, if I'm being honest. Okay, so now let's go through some of the characters of the show. First one up, of course, we have the titular character himself, Mr. Obi-Wan Kenobi, aka Ben Kenobi, aka Ewan McGregor. Ewan McGregor 20 years later. It's good to see him back. It's really, really good to see him back. He's still looking really, really good, and he seamlessly delves back into this character as if it hasn't been 20 years since he last played him, which I find very impressive. I also find it so funny how we're in this age in Hollywood where, you know, any actor who portrayed any somewhat popular character in a major franchise could be called in at any moment. Could be called at any moment, literally like 20, 30, 40 years after they portrayed the character. Like literally, you need to stay fit, you need to stay healthy, because you could get the call from Disney, Warner Brothers, Universal at any time. We've seen for a moment now how important nostalgia is. Like nostalgia sells better than sex these days, and we are seeing all of these actors who portrayed iconic characters decades ago return to make reappearances so that audiences can ooh and ah at their appearance. I mean, just look at Spider-Man No Way Home, and more recently even the Jurassic World Dominion movie. And Ewan McGregor's return to the Star Wars universe was really welcomed because he was seen as one of the best parts of the prequel trilogy, even before people started revising history claiming that the prequels were actually good films. Even though I'm not a prequels fan, I can't doubt Ewan McGregor's acting abilities. Like the man can act. Like, what can I say? The man man can act. Like I said, he slipped right back into this role so seamlessly, but he was also the emotional core here, and he was acting against, you know, a young girl for the majority of the time. And that's props to the actress who portrays young Leia as well, because she had a huge task in portraying this young version of iconic character against another iconic character. And so it wasn't an easy feat, but you know, I do think that she and Ewan McGregor built this really convincing rapport, and I do think that Ewan McGregor was able to sell those emotional moments. There was a lot of acting through his eyes, because there was obviously a lot that he couldn't tell her about her family, about her parents, about the fact that her father is Darth Vader, the man that they're running away from. Like, it was a whole dramatic situation that he had to convey through his eyes and through the words that were left unsaid. And I think Ewan McGregor did a phenomenal job of selling that each and every episode. And then next up, of course, we have the other side of the equation, Anakin Skywalker turned Darth Vader, who is once again portrayed by Hayden Christensen. Listen, I have to say, my favorite part of this entire Obi-Wan Kenobi saga has got to be watching the interviews with Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor. That has been my favorite part in all of this, regardless of what I give the show in terms of a score, in terms of my thoughts and review of the show, regardless of all of that boring stuff. I have to say that what I've enjoyed the most is watching Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen on this press tour, you know, watching them talk about their experience making the prequels and also their thoughts about, you know, the reaction that people had to the prequels. I noticed that they kind of had these like repetitive talking points that obviously PR gave them, and they definitely stuck to this narrative that the fans love the prequels but the critics weren't fans of them. That's not necessarily true. That's not necessarily the full picture, but I get it. They're not going to harp on about how, you know, people hated on them for the prequels for decades. So yeah, they changed the narrative just a little bit. I did notice that, but it was really heartening to see the welcome that Ewan McGregor and in particular Hayden Christensen got back into the franchise. Like, that was really, really lovely to see, especially because how Hayden Christensen was dragged for so long for his acting abilities and how he portrayed Anakin Skywalker, even though he was literally just reading off of the page that George Lucas wrote. I think George Lucas deserves the blame to this day. To this day, I think George Lucas deserves way more of the blame than any of these actors got. But yeah, that was my favorite part in all of this, guys. So yeah, if you haven't checked out some interviews with them, I would highly recommend you do so, because it's just so endearing. Oh, it's so cute. But in terms of Hayden Christensen's performance in the series, I have to say, we didn't get as much of him as I thought we would. At least we didn't get as much of him without the attire. Okay, with his face showing as much as I thought we would. We get some like flashback sequences, and that's kind of like the result of Darth Vader, the character, being so terribly disfigured because of that little incident that he had on that volcano planet. He isn't looking his best, and so all the scenes that we see of him in the present basically have him in his, you know, Darth Vader attire, in his armor. Or we do get that moment at the very end in the finale where we see him through the crack of the helmet and he is just looking rough, you know, but it is clearly Hayden Christensen underneath all of that makeup, which I think was really cool to see that. I was actually so happy to see him back on this show, even though I had no affection for this character in the prequels. Overall, I love the way that they portrayed Darth Vader on this show. I think he was so badass, so menacing, so evil, and I think they did justice to the character. And that's something that I've always appreciated about the Disney Star Wars films, you know. Before we had Obi-Wan Kenobi, my favorite sequence with Darth Vader in it was definitely the sequence in Rogue One. I thought he looked the most badass that he ever had in Rogue One, and you know, when you look at the sequences that he had in the original trilogy, you know, of course that trilogy introduced the character, made him iconic, etc, etc, but he was nowhere near as slick, as dangerous, as cunning and evil as he has been in these, more recent projects. I have to say, like, they have truly improved the portrayal of the character in the more recent projects, and I don't think Disney Lucasfilm get enough credit for doing so. Here in the series, not only do you of course have the badass action sequences with Darth Vader, especially when he was fighting against Reva. That action sequence was insane. The lightsaber battle between them was crazy. I think that was the best one of the whole show, honestly. Even better than the ones that he had with Obi-Wan. But even though they were sick as hell, at the end of the day, what this show is rooted in is the emotional relationship between Obi-Wan and Anakin. And the fact that at the end of the series, Obi-Wan realizes that Anakin Skywalker is dead. He died, and not only did he die, but he was killed by not him, but Darth Vader, at least according to Darth Vader himself. And also, speaking of Darth Vader, I have to say that they made excellent use of James Earl Jones's voice in this series. I don't know if they had like some special technology to kind of merge James Earl Jones's voice with Hayden Christensen's voice, especially in the sequence in the finale, but they did a really great job of realizing it. I feel like they definitely tinkered with it to make him sound a bit younger like he did in the original trilogy, but it was really effective. James Earl Jones's voice, it's just like literally the man is so gifted vocally, man. But yeah, he voices one of the most iconic characters, or several of the most iconic characters in all of cinema, and I think they did a really good job of utilizing it here on this show. And thirdly, speaking of Miss Reva, oh my goodness, let's discuss this brand new character in the Star Wars lore who is portrayed by Moses Ingram. Now, I say brand new, but apparently she is part of the like Rebels series or the Clone Wars series. I don't watch the animated Star Wars stuff, I'm so sorry. So like, I don't know where she was introduced, but I am aware she was already introduced in that show. But here we have the live action version of the character, who I think was an excellent addition to this world. I was so sad and upset and angry to see the reception that Moses Ingram was met with by a lot of these Star Wars fans. Like, that was really crushing to me, to see the racism, to see the discrimination, the hatred that she was met with by some of these trolls, these hateful people on social media. I mean, just look at the contrast. Look at the contrast of how Hayden Christensen was welcomed back with open arms into the franchise, whereas Moses Ingram, who delivered an excellent performance in this show, was treated with such hatred and discrimination. That just breaks my heart. But unfortunately, it doesn't even surprise me, because it's a part of this movement that we've been seeing on social media in particular, where there's this huge backlash against any projects that dares to have positive representation of an underrepresented group in media. It just makes me so angry. I already had a whole rant about this in my review of Lightyear, so if you want to hear more about my thoughts on this, you can go ahead and check out that video. But yeah, I was really sad to see this apply as well to this brand new character, this black female character within the Star Wars world. Star Wars has traditionally been a very exclusionary franchise. It hasn't had a lot of POC characters, and it's only now that we're starting to see more racial representation in this franchise. But of course, there are some people who just can't handle the idea that there would be more than one type of character, in this franchise, in this world that literally exists in a galaxy far away. And it's just so angry to see them express those stupid thoughts, express that toxic rhetoric online to the point where it dominates the conversation surrounding the show. But what really got me was the gaslighting, because these people were literally looking me dead in the eye and being like, oh no, I don't hate this character because she's a black woman. I just hate her because she's really badly written, or because, Moses Ingram is a terrible actress, or because blah, blah. Meanwhile, literally they were typing this out in the first week of the show. Literally only 2 episodes had aired, and they were already typing this out as if they had already seen the entirety of the character's arc, and they would be able to make an accurate judgment of how well the character was written based off what they saw in the first 2 episodes of this 6-episode season. It's ridiculous. And what's really tricky about all of this, as I mentioned in my review of Lightyear is that because this kind of toxic rhetoric dominates these projects, it's tough to even talk about these projects and constructively criticize them in any real way, because you have that politicization just kind of hanging over them. So in the case of Reva, I don't think that the character of Reva is perfect on the show. I think Moses Ingram did a phenomenal job portraying the character, but I do think that we needed a little bit more time with her to fully understand her motives. Perhaps if we had seen more of the Order 66 sequence play out, where we understood, you know, Reva and Anakin's relationship a little bit more. You know, she sees him as the scary monster who killed all of her friends, who killed all of the children. I can't remember what the children are called on this universe, but he killed everyone at the Jedi Academy, the Jedi school for Jedi kids. So obviously she's really traumatized by that, and she actually wants to kill him initially, but when she fails to do so, she settles on killing his son. I don't know how she found out that Luke was his son, but yeah, that's what she settled on doing. I do feel like we needed a bit more time with the character to fully understand her motives, but that's not a critique on Moses Ingram. That's not a critique that has anything to do with the color of the character's skin. That has everything to do with the writing. It has everything to do with how they used these 6 episodes that they had in order to portray the story. But overall, I enjoyed the Obi-Wan series. I have to say I was a bit worried there. With the first few episodes, I was like, is this just gonna be a huge pile of disappointment? I don't think that the first 2 episodes were compelling enough to be split into 2. They should have been one big episode that would have been far more impactful and far more of an interesting start to the series, and then we would have got an extra episode to explore Darth Vader and the Empire at this point, and of course this new character of Reva, and also the Grand Inquisitor, who like disappears for the majority of the show and then pops back up at the end only to be irrelevant once again. There were so many loose plot points throughout the show, and we didn't really have much time to spare, which is why it was so weird that the first 2 episodes set such a leisurely pace. But whilst I was definitely curious at the beginning of the series and a little bit worried by the middle, I would definitely say that the end saved it for me. It gave us some excellent action sequences, especially with Darth Vader, which is what we have wanted and what we have needed from this franchise, because despite the fact that he's such an iconic character, the previous action sequences that we got from him, especially in the original trilogy, were garbage. The fact that they were giving it to us on a TV show, not even a feature film, I think is truly extraordinary and speaks to the golden age of television that we are still living in. Although having said that, I do think now that perhaps Obi-Wan Kenobi should have been a movie instead, if you think about it. I do think that they could have condensed this storyline to be a movie if they had cut out certain parts, in particular the Leia kidnapping. And also I did want to quickly mention my thoughts on the volume. Whilst I think the volume is some impressive technology, and that's another talking point that Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen kept mentioning in their interviews, it is truly impressive what they're able to do with the volume, which is this like huge, you know, 360 room of screens that, you know, allow actors to act against their environment instead of just having green screens around them, which would have been the actors' experiences doing the prequels. Whilst I think that's all well and good, I am starting to notice now the drawbacks of the volume. You can definitely tell that these Star Wars shows are filmed using the volume because they have that similar kind of confined feeling. They still feel quite restricted, which I find interesting. So yeah, I don't think the volume is an adequate replacement for being on location, but I do think it can make for really beautiful scenes, especially when it's used for more artistic effect as opposed to setting up an actual world for characters to exist in. So with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Obi-Wan Kenobi a 7.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Obi-Wan Kenobi, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this series down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch you videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.